Seem to be. We're at the Mishnah Lamed Beis Amud Beis. In fact, there are two Mishnahs at the lower end of the page on Lamed Beis Amud Beis. I think we just started the Mishnah. We didn't go into the Gemara. But let's have a look and see where we are. Yeah, everybody's got that? We spoke about this last time. We spoke about people passing in front of the box. On the box. The box here, of course, does mean the Oren Kodesh. So we got, beyond someone who passes. Here we are, Malcolm. Good to see you. Just the mission on Lamed Beis Amud Beis, towards the end of the Amud, Lamed Beis. Someone who is acting as the Chazan or the Baal Tefillah, passing in front of the Oren Kodesh. That's where they would daven. Have you got the Mishnah there at the end? About 12 lines up, a bit more maybe, 15. B'yom Tov Shel Rosh Hashanah, Hasheni Maskia. It's the second Baal Tefillah, and there's another, we mentioned this before, it looks like they'd split the Baalei Tefillah, or the Chazonim, between Shachris and Musaf. Many places do that. So it was the second one where they're causing the shofar to be blown. It sounds again like it wasn't the person who was davening who was blowing the shofar, which he could do. But if you remember, certainly in those days where it wasn't written down, it was all memory. We didn't really want to confuse the Baal Tefillah, so normally they wouldn't blow the shofar as well. So he would cause someone else to blow. In other words, by davening through the Musaf, that's when you'd have the shofar being blown. We'll talk about this. Ubishas HaHalel, times when Hallel is recited, Horishon, Makres HaMegillah, Mikre, no, it's really Makre, isn't it? Makri. It's the first person, the Shachris, after davening Kriya Shema and the Amida of Shachris, then you have Hallel. But when it comes to blowing the shofar, it's after the or during the second Amida. You could have the first Amida, and then Shachris, it would be that much longer, together with Malchus, remember, Zechronis, Malchus, Zechronis, and Shofars. You could have that in Shachris. They could have instituted that in Shachris. But interesting, so the shofar blowing is after Shachris, after the laning. You're going into Musaf during Musaf, whereas Hallel follows Shachris before actual Kriyas HaTorah, and the Gemara will pick up why is that. So we're happy with that, as we know. Says the Gemara, Mai Shana. What's the difference? What's the difference between blowing the shofar and reciting Hallel? Mai Shana Sheni Maskia. What is the reason why it's the second Baal Tefillah who causes the shofar to be blown? And particularly we're talking about the repetition of the Amida. It's during the repetition of the second Amida, which is Musaf. Why is that? Why is there that delay of blowing the shofar rather than having it earlier on? And you could have it during the Amida of Shachris. The Gemara suggests, is it Mishum de Barov Om Hadras Melech? People familiar with that pasuk, Rovom Hadras Melech. Just a quick look at Rashi on the Mishnah before we look at this pasuk, please. So I'll just give you a moment, Peter, to get together. We'd like to look at this pasuk, Rovom Hadras Melech, which comes from Proverbs 14:28. So well done. Let's go to Tanakh. Higher up, Tanakh, yes. Proverbs. Thank you. 14:28. Very swift, thank you. As we come down to Ben, notice how 28, there you go. Thank you. Barov Om Hadras Melech. In our Gemara, we actually have Barov Om Hadras Melech. And it really is Rovom because it's hyphenated, the word Barov Om, even though you wouldn't see the hyphen, but it's a linked word with a hyphen, really. And therefore, the Cholom, Barov, becomes Rovom. You with me? Notice that in numerous people, don't we say that anyway? Is the good, it's in American. Barovom, in other words, with a large gathering, Hadras Melech is the glory of the king. So it's I only point this out because people may be familiar with the ruling Rov Om Hadras Melech. In fact, it's Rovom, as I mentioned. The Cholom becomes a komatz. For those really into grammar, it's a kamatz katan, so it would be pronounced Borov Am, even in Sfardit, Borov Am, like the word kol. It's a kamatz katan, but that's because the word is hyphenated. And I just
that doesn't alter the meaning, does it? Whether you say
no, it doesn't. No. It's like the word kol. The word really is kol, means everything or everybody. If it's linked to another word, kol ha'oretz, the kol becomes a cholon becomes a comma. And again, the word kol is hyphenated. Kol ha'om, kol ha'oretz. So if ever you're reading the word kol, it's a kamatz katan, komatz koton, which means it's pronounced as an o rather than an a, even in Sfardit. And the same point here. But it doesn't change the meaning. It's not a word. No, the point is this. Rove could be a word on its own, a noun. Here, it's not a noun, it's Barov. Yeah? It's like an adjective. It's describing the people. And therefore, he's got in English here, numerous people. It means a large gathering of people. Rov, linked up. So in answer to your question, really, I suppose it does change the meaning because it's no longer a noun, rove, lots of people, or koil, everyone. It now becomes describing the word om. Yeah, Benji.
I wonder if it's still a noun, of a sort of a compound noun, like a policeman. A policeman becomes one word. But what I really want to ask is so why in our text in the Gemara does it say is the cholon there barovam? Is that a typo?
No, it's not a typo. It's the way we normally pronounce. People do pronounce it rovam hadras melech, but you're right. It really should be rovam. You often find that in the Gemara just to we're familiar with the word rov, and therefore the Gemara just helps us along.
Because it's Torah Shabbat Peh, and this is the way.
Yeah, the way people say it. Notice it. Yeah, it's got that vov in to show it's a cholom in our Gemara, for rovom. But it's not so much a typing. But that's the way people know. And if people are mentioning it says rovom, but it's. I'm only if you want to be absolutely correct, it's rovom. But it's the way pronounced. You'd say rovom. So say if you say you want to be, wouldn't say pedantic, but if you want to be absolutely accurate, the word is rovom, and that's why I mentioned it here. But it's often in colloquial, almost said rovom, and that's the possible people would know. But you don't have to pull them up for that. If anybody says rovom, yes. So there you are, rovom hadros melech. So let's go back to our Gemara. What's this all about? Is the reason why, it just shows you about people coming to shul. Our Gemara suggests, why is it when it comes to blowing the shofar, we don't blow earlier on in the service? Why is it during Musaf? Why not during Shachris? They could have instituted during Shachris. And the Gemara is suggesting, is the reason because have you got the Gemara there? My Shana, beginning of line Shana. What's the difference? That Sheni Maskia. Is it Mishum the Rovom Hadras Melech or Rovom Hadras Melech? Is it because you're expecting more people to be there by the time you get to Musaf? Not just they're late. I mean, it wasn't always that easy to get to shul. It was a long a long walk for many people, certainly in those days. And therefore, is the reason why we leave the shofar blowing for later because we hope there will be more people there for Musaf? Says the Gemara, if so.
I was going to say, things haven't changed much.
No, there you go. Yeah, yeah.
But the walk couldn't have been that long. It had to be within a ton, didn't it? I mean, there couldn't be
indeed,
3
we'll
hours.
get to that. Yeah, quite right. It wasn't that far. But yeah, again, perhaps later on in the day, it was easier to walk. It could have been dangerous walking too early. So good reasons. Perhaps there were better reasons in those days why people were late rather than today. No real reason today, but you're quite right. So the Gemara is suggesting here, is the reason why the shofar's delayed till Musaf so that more people will be in attendance? Says the Gemara, if that's true, if that's the case, Halel Nami. Why don't we have Hallel after Musaf? Why do we have Hallel after Shachris before Kriyas HaTorah? If you want more people to be there, especially for the Hallel, Barovom, and we're talking about performing. Nobody's suggesting they wouldn't perform the mitzvah, but it's nice to perform the mitzvah in a large gathering. That's called Rovom Hadras Melech. Doing mitzvahs in a Rovom Hadras Melech. We spoke, lots of, rather than doing things on an individual basis, it's nice to do them with a throng, nice to do with a large gathering. In which case, why isn't the Hallel the same? Hallel Nami, Nema B'Sheni. It should also be said during the second Amid, in other words, Musaf, maybe following Musaf, the end of Musaf, that's where you should have Hallel. Like we have. I was going to say Animis Miras, but some people do have Animis Miras after Shachris. But yeah, leave it to the end. Says the Gemara, Nema B'Sheni Mishum Brut. There's your Rovom again. Rovom Hadras Melech. Elo Maishno Hallel the Berishin. So let's think about Hallel now. Let's focus on Hallel. Why do we say Hallel after Shachris rather than even for Musaf? The Gemara suggests a good reason. The Berishin Mishum Dezrizin Makdimim the mitzvahs. There's a nice, so you can see where that Gemara comes up on the side, comes up in Psochim. In fact, we learned Psochim, that first parak, or the first part. It comes up in 3 places in Shas. Psochim in Yuma, and here's the other example. Zerizin Magdim in the mitzvahs. It's good to be quick, to be able to perform mitzvahs. Alacrity, do it with zrizos, do it with some excitement and passion. Get on. We're looking forward to the mitzvah. Get on and do it. Is that the reason why Hallel is said earlier on in the Tfilos? In which case, says the Gemara, Tzikiya Nami Navid Berishin. Then why don't we have the shofar earlier on? Mishum Zerizin Makdim in the mitzvahs. We like to perform mitzvahs as soon as we can. So why isn't the same thing with the shofar? So we've got now 2 reasons. Either Rovam seems to leave things for later. Zerizim Makdim in the mitzvahs seems to make things earlier rather than later. And why the contradiction between the 2? Omar Rabbi Yochanan, a great Rabbi Yochanan, Bishas Gezeres HaMalchus Shonu. This was learned. Some people change this wording from Shonu. Actually, it doesn't say Gezeres HaMalchus. In the uncensored version of Shas, it says Bishas HaShmad. When they were out there trying to persuade people, Bishas HaShmad. This was learned Bishas HaShmad. What does it mean, Bishas HaShmad? Where they either you learn Bishas HaShmad or Bishas Gezeres HaMalchus, which means that there was a decree. Let's have a look at Rashi. Bishas Gezeres HaMalchus, when there were decrees coming from the Malchus, particularly talking about the Romans. Oivim Gozru, says Rashi, Shelo Yisku. No shofar blowing, please. Vo'yorvim lohem kol sheish shois. They were lying, waiting the first 6 hours of the day, because again, you can see the principle of Zerizus would have been paramount. They would have expected the people to perform the mitzvah as soon as possible. Lekates, sounds like by the time they got to the end of Tfilah Shachris. Interesting. Seems like they managed to get away with blowing it during Musaf. They were lying in, waiting for them, in ambush almost, waiting for them. Don't blow the shofar. Forbidden to blow the shofar. Certainly forbidden to blow the shofar in the morning. The main mitzvah would have been in the morning because of Zerizus, and therefore it was delayed until the afternoon. It sounds like they managed to get away with it by blowing later on. What they didn't want is them to blow the shofar in the morning. And therefore, that's a reason why it was delayed. And that only applies, of course, to the shofar. The rest of the service, it sounds like they managed to be able to daven. And during Shachris, they could do Hallel. So the reason seems to be it should be earlier. Zerizus seems to win the day, which means mitzvahs should be done as soon as possible. Zerizim makdim mitzvahs. But there's a reason here. Blowing the shofar was delayed. There was a decree about blowing the shofar. Hallel happens more often, and it seems to be part of the service. So they didn't go that far. But blowing the shofar was. Now, you could say that's in those days. What about today? Please have a look at Tosfos.
I mean, it was more discreet. I mean, shofar was more obvious to outside.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
That was, so which
can't hear you. Sorry. Can you repeat that?
This is talking about the time of the Gemara, isn't it?
Yes, at the time of the Gemara.
The Shemad. Yeah. So which are we talking about? Which one are we talking about? The Roman?
It sounds like the time of the Romans. I mean, if you've got the answers sensitive, which does say B'shas Hashmad, which means normally means moving people away from Judaism. That's B'shas Hashmad normally. But we've got Gezeirus Hamalchus again. We don't know exactly what the Gezeirus Hamalchus is, but whatever happens, they wanted to prevent them blowing the shofar, and therefore in the morning, that's when they came checking up on them. Now, you could say that's then. What about today? Have a look at Tosfos, please. At least the first part. Even though Shebot lo Gezeirus Hamalchus, that's gone. Thank goodness we are free to be able to blow in most places, free to be able to blow the shofar when we like. Lo of dinan kedamei kara. Wow. Lo of dinan, we do not do kedamei kara. Interesting. Sounds like originally, prior to the Mishnayos, they would have blown actually in Shachris. Interesting. But why do we not go back, revert back to that blowing in Shachris? Afal gav dizrizi makdim in the mitzvahs. There's that principle we've mentioned before. So it does look like zrizi makdim in the mitzvahs wins the day. So why don't we revert back to that? We are free, thank goodness, to be able to blow the shofar. Why not blow earlier on? Says Rash Tosfos to Chayshinon Shemi Yachsa Dominil Kulai. There's always a concern. Yes, good times at the moment, but we're always looking and concerned and hoping that things won't revert back to the old days when it was difficult. So therefore, once it's been now established in Musaf, we continue with doing it in Musaf. But I just point out that Rashi there, Tosfos, when he said Lo of Dinan, Kedamei Kara. So it does sound like the Afagab that in the say former days it would have been in Shachris, and then it's pushed now to Musaf because of this Gezeirus Hamalchus, the decree, and that continues on because we're always worried what might happen in the future sometimes. So that's kept there. Thank you very much. Back to our Gemara.
Norman, surely the Romans would have worked out after a couple of years
that they're blowing later on.
Being done. They weren't that stupid.
They're true. they weren't that stupid, but what they wanted is trying to, you can see they didn't mind them praying and saying in shul. But it looks like doing the mitzvah in the best way is what they wanted to push off. And the mitzvahs normally would have been done in the morning, Shachris. You can see that from Rashi. They waited until those 6 hours. You're not going to blow. In other words, we're controlling you to that extent. It wasn't total annulling the whole mitzvah, but we're not allowing you to perform the mitzvah in the way you'd like to perform it. That's the point. And doing it in the morning, you can see that from Rashi. You're quite right. Otherwise, they of course they would have known. But it's to blow the shofar in the best way is what they were keen on trying to remove. That, and they can see from the Rashi the first 6 hours, and therefore, right, you're blowing. We know you're not really doing the job in the best way, as we would prefer to do it, as I say, in the morning rather than the afternoon. Back to our Gemara. Mida ka'oma. Have you got that, the Gemara? About 9 lines up. So remember, what did the Mishnah say? When Hallel was recited, it recited earlier on in Shachris. Now notice the wording of the Mishnah again. Ubishas ha'Hallel. Why doesn't it just mention when recited? Like we've got the first part. Over lifnei ateva beyond of Rosh Hashanah, Hasheni maskia, Avohorishon, Mikres HaMegillah, or Makres HaMegillah. What's this of Bishas HaHallel? A time when Hallel is recited. Those extra 2 words, says the Gemara, seem to signify. Go back to the Gemara, please. Midakama Bishas HaMechlal. It's not talking about Rosh Hashanah. It's talking about other occasions when they recite Hallel, not on Rosh Hashanah. Otherwise, you could have left those 2 words out. You could have said, the second one, during the second Amida, you have the shofar, and just after the first Amida, you have Hallel. Says the Gemara, Michlal, from there you can infer to Rosh Hashanah, Leka Hallel. There is no Hallel. Hallel is normally recited on a Yom Tov, as we know, or Rosh Chodesh, Yom Tov. Why shouldn't it be recited on this day as well? Now, there's an additional point here. We'll come to that in the Mishnah Berurah in a moment. I'll call on you, Peter. But why shouldn't it be recited on Rosh Hashanah? Ma Tama. What's the reason why? Omer Rabbi Avo. Rabbi Avo says, comes up elsewhere, Omru Malachi Ashoris Lefnei HaKodesh Baruch Hu. It's almost like why shouldn't your people, Bnei Yisrael, Rebbeinu Shalom, Mipnei Ma'en Yisrael Omrim Shira, why aren't they praising you as they would do on a normal Yom Tov? This is sort of almost something negative against Klal Yisrael, that they're not praising Hashem with this beautiful Hallel. B'Rosh Hashanah, next line of B'Yom HaKippurim, Omar Lohem, very powerful message back for us. Efshe Melech Yoshev al Kisei Din, the king is sitting on the throne of judgment. V'Sifrei Chaim, V'Sifrei Mesim, Psuchim Lefonov. Today is the day of judgment. Starting Rosh Hashanah, concluding with Yom Kippur. V'Yisrael Omrim Shira. Is that an occasion to sing Shira? If I can call upon you, please, let's go back, Peter, this time to the Shulchan Aruch. If you see the little Lamed, it takes me on the side to Simon Tov Kuf Pei Dalad, which is 584. Oh, wow. Very quick off the mark there. 584. Thank you. Ein Omrim Hallel. This is the Mishnah Berurah. I've actually gone straight to the Mishnah Berurah. We couldn't actually, if you wouldn't mind going back and let's go to the Shulchan Aruch texts. Go for text Let's go for the Shulchan Aruch. Let's go for drop down halacha. We'll find the Mishnah in a moment. No, you've gone too far. Halacha. Shulchan Aruch. Orach Chaim. Now press the 584 as we drop down to 584. Very good. This time we'll get the actual wording of the Shulchan Aruch. Ein omrim halel b'Rosh Hashanah v'Yom HaKippurim. Now, if you double click on that, Peter, you've got now the commentary around the side. And we can go down to Mishnah Berurah. Drop down to M for Mishnah Berurah. Thank you very much, the Mishnah Berurah, the Chavetz Chaim. Now, we can see it next to each other. That's nice. We've got the Shulchan Aruch on the left. Simon, that means chapter 584. No halal, so we paskin like this. Ein omrim halal, says the Mishnah Berurah, lefi shesifrei chaim v'hameisim pesuchim v'eich yomer shira. How can one sing praise? Oh yes, it's Yom Tov. People are acting accordingly. It's called a chag. Now this is the important point. But then, wow, we have certain trust that things will work out okay. Mikomokom, very interesting. Tzorich liyos yorei v'chored me'emasadin va'al yedei kain nizkar l'zchus nizocher l'zchus. What he's saying is this. One, as we said, it's Rosh Hashanah. Yom, as I say, Sifrei Chaim, Sifrei Mesim. There's got to be that awe and trepidation. With that awe and trepidation, we realize it's Rosh Hashanah. That itself will give us the zechus, the merit, we hope, that we should be successful in din. So in other words, it's this fear and the trepidation and the awe and the sounding of that shofar, which makes us, as I say, feel Rosh Hashanah. That itself should be a zechus, a merit, allowing us, we hope, to be successful in din. So very powerful point there. He's saying that yes, it's Yom Tov. Yes, we're behaving as if it's a Yom Tov. There is confidence, but it's not a time for Shiur. That's the point. So we've got these two things going together. It's very much Ivdu es Hashem beyira, the fear, the trepidation, but nevertheless, Klal Yisrael should have this confidence. In fact, there's another halacha in Shulchan Aruch that people should dress accordingly. We're not in rags. We're not on the floor like we are on Tisha B'Av. It's not a day of mourning because we have this confidence that Hashem hopefully will look after us. But there's got to be this chus, this trepidation, the Eimas Hadin. And you don't have this Eimas Hadin if we're singing Hallel. Hallel is kept for Sukkot on the other Yom Tovim, but not Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's really what we're saying. So very powerful point here. On the Betuchim, we have this trust, and there should be this trust that yes, we've come on Rosh Hashanah and we've got this trepidation. This chus just of having that trepidation should be sufficient. There's got to be that trepidation. It's Yom Tov. We've got to be confident. We're not in tears. Maybe the prayers warrant tears, but the idea is it's a Yom Tov trepidation. And that Ivdu es Hashem beyira is the day of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And therefore it's not an occasion so quite... and have a look at the little base on Rosh Hashanah. The Mishnah continues, oh, sorry, I've just got... You can go back to that. I just wanted to point out, Peter. Oh, is it too late? Oh, well done. Look at letter base of the Mishnah Berurah. And the Mishnah Berurah says those people who say Tehillim every day, very nice too. Umisrami lohem halel b'yom Rosh Hashanah. They're saying one chapter a day to whatever it is, 2 chapters a day. There are certain ways of completing over a month or whatever it is. And it just so happens that they are saying Hallel, those chapters of Tehillim on Rosh Hashanah. Are they meant to leave it out? Says the Mishnah Berurah b'yom Rosh Hashanah b'yom Kippur, Shori la'omro. They are permitted. In other words, you're allowed to say the chapters starting from 113 onwards, 114 you've got from there on, where you've got the chapters of Hallel. If it just so happens, as you're in your order, you're saying a chapter a day, thinking about a chapter a day or whatever, and it happens to be on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, you get to those chapters where Hallel, those are the chapters of Hallel, it's still permissible to say them. Kiven she'ein oimrim oisa derech shira. You're not saying that as a song, rak derech techina or bakosha. It's people who have this minute to be able to say chapters of Tehillim. Wonderful thing to do. It's more as a supplication. It's a request. It's a bakosha, and therefore that's fine. What you mustn't do, however, as part of davening, is have the Hallel sung as it normally would be. That is not appropriate for Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, but saying Tehillim certainly is absolutely fine. And that Mishnah Berurah adds that as that letter base on this siman, this chapter in Shulchan Aruch. Thank you, Peter. Let's go back to the Gemara.
I think Malcolm wants to.
Malcolm is raising his hand. You'll have to come up. Yes.
Yeah,
Hello.
I just wondered on that note whether, what about the other psalms? What about the morning psalms and also
Absolutely,
the daily psalms in the temple?
Good point.
No,
All perfectly permitted. Yes, it's only Hallel sung as a Shira sung as Hallel, those chapters.
Yeah, but with
any
the
other
Levites.
The Levites.
In the temples.
We've seen that here. There are certain, yes, they would say something which again would be appropriate for Rosh Hashanah. That's fine. But any saying of Tehillim, that's why I point out that Mishnah Berurah, any saying of Tehillim, Psalms, is perfectly in order. You've got Psukei Zimra, as you say. But singing Hallel, singing those chapters of Psalms, of Tehillim, as a Hallel, that is not the order of the day. That's all we're saying. But yeah.
Wouldn't the daily psalm have been sung?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Any
if
psalm.
I interject, it's the purpose, Norman, isn't it? It's the purpose of what it said. Like on Yom Ha'atzmaut, you say it as a Shevach Mahudah.
Yes.
Which is separate from the ritual of every day, which the Nevi'im were doing.
That's right, absolutely. Yeah. And as I mentioned in Mishnah Berurah, people who say psalms, and it happens to be that chapter, which is exactly the chapter for Hallel. That's fine, because you're not saying it as a song, you're saying it for another purpose, and that's fine. So the Nevi'im, they would sing psalms, or it's only those few chapters, of course, which is Hallel. Going up to 119, isn't it? It goes to 114, 119, 118 inclusive. Those chapters can be said, but not, and you're quite right, Malcolm, the Levium would be singing, chanting, and that have musical instruments, but not as a song, as a shira, a praise, of thanksgiving. Now, that is not really appropriate.
I suppose my question is where do you draw the line? That was my sort of real question. Is that because it's not.
I think
there's praise.
Yeah, praise there is, absolutely, and you see a lot of the davening on Rosh Hashanah is full of praise. We're talking about the King, Hashem Melech, etc. But when if it comes under the category of Hallel, when you're singing I know you almost like translate Hallel as praise, but you're singing it as praise of thanksgiving.
Wouldn't it be when you say a bracha? Wouldn't that be the distinction that Malcolm's doing? If you say a bracha, it creates a Hallel, then you're saying
likro, you're quite right. Likro es Hallel, or ligmo.
That's a technical reason.
Yeah, but I suppose it's what is the purpose of saying or chanting those Tehillim? Is it praise of thanksgiving and excitement? Almost you say happy days, or not? If you're saying the Tehillim as almost like requests or just praising God, that's one thing. But if it's part of the happy day that it is, like typically Yom Tov, that is not appropriate on Rosh Hashanah. So any of the Tehillim, include of course the Leviim, and as we've just seen in the Mishmar, any Tehillim are permitted. But it's just the way it's sung. If it's a Thanksgiving and a happy day, and you're right, the brach at the beginning would show that it really is under that banner. Likros Hallel. It's true, it's a technicality, but it shows that it's being sung in that way for Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Okay. We have Hallel Hagodol in Shachris.
Yeah,
on Rosh Hashanah.
That's thanking God, but it's not. You're quite right. Very good point. Hallel Hagodol 136. Yeah. Hodel Hashem Kito Kili Olamcha. So that's still right, but it's not full of this happiness, and that I think that's the point. It's of course, there's still praise, as we say, Hodel Hashem so many times. The beginning of Pesukei Zimra starting off with Hodel Hashem, thanking Nodelecha. We've got Modim, which is thanks, but there's a difference in thanks and praising with full excitement and happiness. That is not appropriate. So if it was Hashem Beyiro is more the order of the day. But that's a good point actually. Please you raise that. The Hallel.
Well, at the end of the shofar sounding, you say happy is. Sorry.
Word Hallel. It's singing Hallel. Oh, Ashrei. Happy is that person. Yeah, but there's a different type of happiness. That's an internal happy is Ashrei Yoshvei Besecha. Happy are those means an internal happiness rather than outwardly showing the happy day, let's say of Yom Tov or other occasions. That's the point. So it's more of an internal happiness, a peace, internal peace. Yeah, for good points. On to the next Mishnah, gentlemen. Shofar Shel Rosh Hashanah. Ein ma'virin olov es hatchum. We mentioned before the tchum, how far a person can normally walk on Shabbos or on Yom Tov. There's what's called tchumin, and this is outside the city. So you've got the city. Once it's a built-up area, that's all part of the city. It's going beyond that, and you have 2,000 amas outside the city. It's an important point, actually, which means walking, and we're not talking about carrying things. That's a separate point. We're not discussing carrying, with an Erev, without an Erev. There's another point, which is 2,000 amas, about 1 kilometer, it's not that much, outside the city. Once you've got to the edge of the city, you cannot go beyond that point. Well, beyond 2,000 amas, about 1 kilometer. Now that's quite important. And in London or wherever you are, even in Manchester, wherever, it's a long way until you get to the boundary of outer, the suburbs outside London and Manchester and Gateshead or wherever you happen to be, Newcastle. But it can occur, of course, if you're on holiday somewhere, or if you're living somewhere where you're basically on your own, or just a couple of houses, then you do have that limit on Shabbos. You might be living there, down in Devon. So you would have this 2,000 amas beyond that you couldn't walk on. Now you can walk round, You could do, a circle around, but you couldn't go beyond this 2,000 amos. Now, our Mishnah is talking about what happens if the shofar is outside the 2,000 amos limit. Can you bring the shofar or not? Says the Mishnah, no. Don't pass over the tchum to be able to bring or even to go to hear the shofar blown on Rosh Hashanah. You can't do that. Imagine there was, the shofar, obviously trying to get the principle here, the shofar is under rubble and it's all a huge amount of rubble and you've got a shofar underneath. Would you be allowed, and it's all stones which are muktzah, you wouldn't be normally touching them on Shabbos or Yom Tov, would you be allowed to remove those stones which would be muktzah in order to be able to get at the shofar? And the answer is, so we've got, you wouldn't be allowed to do that. Interesting. So you're not allowed to desecrate Yom Tov of handling muktzah in order to be able to blow the shofar. You would have said, well, shofar is min ha-Torah, please. Interesting. See that more about this in a minute. La olin be'ilon. The shofar's on top of the tree. Why it's on top of the tree, I can't tell you, but it's on the top of a tree. You wouldn't be allowed to climb the tree. Climbing a tree on Yom Tov or Shabbos is forbidden. Breaking twigs, riding on an animal. There you are, you're riding on your horse or whatever, to be able to get to your shofar. The only way you can get there. You wouldn't be allowed to do that. Again, not permitted to, I'd say, roichev on a behema, on a horse, or on any other animal. Again, you're worried about maybe tearing things to be able to lead the animal. Swimming. What about swimming? You've got to get across the river. Would you be allowed to do that? That's also not permitted. Don't even cut it to form it. Maybe inside, we know about the shofar, how the shofar, we've spoken about that before. You've got the inside of the shofar, which needs to be removed before you can actually get the sound. You wouldn't be allowed to do that. Bein b'davashu mishum shvus. Shvus means a rest. It's a rest midrabanon. It's not a transgressing an avera min ha-Torah, but the rabbis have said you're not allowed to cut in this way. We'll see more about that in the Gemara. Even though it's only midrabanon. In other words, min ha-Torah, you'd be allowed to do this action. Nevertheless, we often find this, that when you have rules of the rabbis which have been instituted, they are equivalent, otherwise people would desecrate them with ease. The rules of which have been adopted by the rabbis are equivalent in many aspects to a min ha-Torah. You've got to treat them with the same respect, which means just like we need to understand that why, in fact, can't you transgress an avera? We have the principle aseh dechalos aseh. Positive normally beats a negative. So why can't you transgress an avera? If that's the only way you can get at your shofar, why can't you go through this tchum, the barrier, the 2,000 amma barrier? We'll see about that in a minute. But anyway, the Mishnah's telling us the rules, and the rules are, no, you can't. Whether it's mishum shvus, whether it's only forbidden midrabanon, ubein, next line, 4 lines up, but dovashu mishum lo saseh, whether it's forbidden min ha-Torah, you cannot transgress these averas in order to perform the shofar. It's a mitzvah min ha-Torah of blowing the shofar. I might have thought it would override an avera. No, it doesn't. It sounds like adding water or a drop of wine, not a drop of whiskey, a drop of wine down the shofar seems to help the sound. that is permitted. Quite an interesting point. I don't know if Malcolm, you know much about the liquids down a shofar to help the sound, increase and improve the sound. This is permitted on Yom Tov, because that's not considered a proper form. I'm not actually forming something by a drop of wine, drop of water down the shofar. That just helps it. In fact, it sounds like you could blow it without that. It would just help the sound, and that is not considered something which is forbidden. So that is permitted. And then the final.
But does the same apply to a guy going? It says you can't go over the Tchum to get a shofar.
Yes.
Well, what about the Baal Tuker? The Baal Tuker's
out. He wouldn't be able. You're quite right. He can't go, and you can't bring it to him.
He can't go to the Kehillah. He can't go to the Beit.
He wouldn't be allowed to break the Tchum, in order to blow. So it happens both ways. Whether the item or the person wouldn't be allowed, and which again you'd say, why not? It's to perform a mitzvah min haTorah. Why not? And we'll see about that in a minute. And then
would the same rule apply on Yom Kippur with regard to pouring wine or whiskey into the shofar?
When you'd only blow the shofar on Yom Kippur after the Yom Tov is over. So whatever happens, that's all permitted. But you're right. You could do that if to blow the shofar the end of the fast, the same thing. You said the difference being, of course, blowing the shofar at the end of Yom Kippur is not a mitzvah min haTorah. It's the minhag, and that we do, but it's not quite the same as blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. But if on Rosh Hashanah you can do that, you could do that in Yom Kippur as well, because it's after the closing. You've actually completed the end of Yom Tov. So yes, you could do that. That wouldn't be a problem. And then the final halacha is.
I think it's somewhere. Can I say something?
Yeah. A couple of people there with their hands up. I think Sam was there. Yeah.
Go ahead, Malcolm. Yeah.
Go ahead, Malcolm. Fine. Yes. You want Sam to go first? Right. Okay.
I'm just wondering, in terms of these. Thank you, Malcolm. In terms of these items, I know the first few are obviously items that one would be forbidden from the outset. But putting water or what was it, wine in the
wine? Yes.
In the shofar is not something that would be forbidden. So why?
Very good. So
why even mention it?
Why is it mentioned? Very good. I might have thought, have a look at the Rashi, which we might as well pick up the Rashis now, although there's another item still in the Mishnah. Let's have a look at the Rashis. Good point. Shofar Shel Rosh Hashanah. When we spoke about the removing rubble, notice he's got the text the other way round. Rashi puts first of all the rubble, then he talks about going across the 2,000 amma limit. Leile chutz l'tchum. There you are, Mervyn. He talks about somebody going across the tchum lishmoya tekiah, and presumably they will be the same if you're blowing, because the blowing or the listening, the person crossing would be doing the same thing. And here's your point. Ein chayt so don't remember cut it or form. That you can't do. You're actually forming. If you've got a shofar with no hole, in other words, you need to remove the inside of the shofar. That you couldn't do, because they're your what's called a tikkun keli. Yeah, that's called tikkun keli. It's called one in Malachas makapapatish, hitting something with a hammer to form something is forbidden. But notice in Rotzalit Esochamayim, here's the Rashi that you want, Sam. Velomrinon komasake mona. You don't classify that as a tikkun in the keli. Yes, it might improve the sound. It might make it easier for the person blowing. But as you say, it was possible without it. But it's just mentioned here. I might have thought maybe that improvement is considered a tikkun. You actually are forming a shofar. No, you're not. and therefore it's in there. But yeah, perhaps you could have worked it out for oneself. Let's just go back to the Mishnah, the last part of the Mishnah. What about children blowing the shofar? Now, we're not talking about, 3-year-olds. We're talking about, let's say, 11, 12. And as we say, the mitzvah of chinuch. Normally, you can see from the Mishnah that it's not, people shouldn't allow them to go around and playing with the shofar, to make some musical instrument, as a musical instrument. But don't prevent the children if they want to blow. They're practicing, a year away from a 12-year-old or so. More than that, says the Mishnah, busy yourself with them. Even on, I'm not talking about during the week, we're talking about on Rosh Hashanah, ad sheyilmadu, until they learn. Nothing wrong with that on Rosh Hashanah, teaching the kids to blow, teaching anybody, well, particularly the children, because it's the chinuch angle, and that's okay. However, worth remembering, says the Mishnah, we've mentioned this Mishnah elsewhere in the Gemara, hamisasek lo yotza, someone who just blowing, not doing the mitzvah, that's the point. He's misasek. He's busying himself, showing maybe a child how to blow, but not intending himself to blow. That is not good enough. You do need, remember we spoke about this before, intention to perform the mitzvah. You have no intention to perform the mitzvah. Well, of course, if you're blowing and at the same time teaching a child and you're blowing to perform the mitzvah yourself, then of course you would. That would be fine. You'd be open. Here we're talking about someone who's just teaching a child, has no intention to perform the mitzvah. He's going to shul after that. Someone who hears from someone who is just busying, in that word asek, busying himself with blowing the shofar, but not intentionally want to do the mitzvah, then again, someone who hears from such an individual, you might have said, well, he's heard the correct notes. Is he Yotze? No, he is not. Remember, it goes back into the points we mentioned before about kavana, intention to perform the mitzvah. Okay, let's just have a quick look at the Gemara.
Sorry.
Yeah, go on.
Tinokot, in modern Hebrew is babies. Tinokot shel beit rabban, there's an expression which is, I think, older children. But we're not talking babies here. We're talking.
No, we're not talking about babies. No, in fact, you're quite right. And it's not an item that you give to a 3-year-old to mess around with. It's true. It's not a pair of tefillin. That's true. It hasn't got kedusha like a Sefer Torah, but nevertheless, it should be used in the correct way. But here, you're quite right. The tinokos we're talking about here are older children, and you're doing it because of the mitzvah of chinuch. So it's when the mitzvah of chinuch would apply. Again, the mitzvah, as we mentioned before, depends on the child. It depends on the wording used in the Gemara, lefi churpeh, according to his capabilities, charif, yeah. If he's strong, sharp, absolutely sharp mentally, and it could be earlier. The mitzvah of chinuch would apply, and that's quite important generally in the mitzvah of chinuch. It's when the child's capable without pushing. So tinok.
In Talmudic use, then, a tinok is anyone up to 12, potentially.
Yeah, yes.
Up to 12.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does this it's about misasek apply even when he's being mechanich the children? Because it's not clear from the Mishnah whether hamisasek lo yotze, that somebody's not messing around but just playing.
No, you're right. It looks like it flows from the previous part of the Mishnah. Avi misaskein imohem ad sheyilmadu.
That's allowed.
It's busying yourself, but that person who is busying himself, but you're right, it would apply to anybody. Somebody who just blowing, seeing what the shofar is like, and he actually gets the correct notes coming out. If there was no intention.
But also you could read the Mishnah that the misasek, that person but if you were being misasek to be mechanic the tinokas, then perhaps you it is okay.
You could, but I think it looks like it flows from the previous part. Yeah. And again, it does depend on the intention. So if you're teaching the child, and maybe this person's not going to shul, for whatever reason, but he's at the same time teaching the child, misasek with the child. He said to himself, I want to perform the mitzvah at the same time. That's fine. But it does look like it flows from there. But let's just have a look at the first line of this Gemara, because that's where it all really, the summary of the whole piece, which is, why not? What do I mean, why not? Why can you not go through the tchum, for example, to blow the shofar? But shofar, we have a principle, asay docha lo saseh, which means a positive normally overrules a negative, asay docha lo saseh, although it has to be at the same time. And here it would never be at the same time anyway, because you'd be, you're going through the tchum before you're blowing, if you see what I mean. And you'd be removing the rubble before you're blowing. And normally aseh say have to be at the same time. And nevertheless, the Gemara does ask it, ma tama, shofar aseh. It's true. Shofar is a mitzvah aseh. Beautiful. We've spoken about the word of chaviva, the sound of the shofar, chaviv. It's once a year or twice a year. It's an aseh though. But Yom Tov is an aseh and a los aseh. There is the psukim which tell us about it's lishbois to rest on Yom Tov, and we've also found the kol malacha los aseh when we do with Yom Tov as well. Yes, you can cook. The oichel nefesh is different, and there's psukim for that. But you can't do other malachos. So it's a positive resting and a negative. So that really throws it out. There's no way you could do any action, any avera to blow the shofar. So now we've got a few reasons. Number one, it wouldn't be at the same time anyway. But without that, Yom Tov is positive, which means it's a day of rest. It's also a day that you shouldn't be doing malacha. So you've got a positive and a negative. Against that, you've got the aseh of blowing the shofar. So one would not beat the other. And as we said before, even though the avera may only be midrabanon, it's the rabbis who instituted a particular avera, which might be the tchum, the 2,000 amas is midrabanon. Mukta is not minat Torah, but nevertheless a strong midrabanon. But we always find that when you have institutions from the rabbis, it's given the same weight. It's to be treated in the same way as a minhag Torah, and therefore that's why all these things, and there's more coming as we explain that in the Mishnah, because why we got these various examples, and say more about that all being well next time. So with that, gentlemen, close for today. I do wish you well. Now, I am here, but my flight is back next Wednesday. So I'm afraid we'll have to have another week off next week, because that's my flight back.
Can I meet you on the plane, Norman? I'm traveling next Wednesday to...
are you? Good. So we can... which flight?
I'm going to bring some kosher books this